All right, so right here we got, did Trunks talk about the androids' power? The androids from Trunks's time are significantly weaker than the androids in the main timeline that we get to watch in the series. There have been a lot of speculation throughout the years as to why that is. One of the main and most probable reasons is just that it's a decision Akira made when he was writing the story and there's no deeper explanation, but we want to have fun with it, so we love to speculate, and I'm hoping that this is a new, innovative, and refreshing take on the topic. So let's get into it.
The Android Saga introduced a mind-blowing new concept unlike anything we had ever seen in Dragon Ball: time travel. This innovation not only created different timelines, but also sparked intense debates about the implications of these parallel realities, especially when it comes to the characters' power levels. And one of the biggest discussions revolves around the power of androids 17 and 18 in Trunks' future compared to their present-day versions. I guarantee that the discussion you're about to see in this video is different from anything you've seen out there, so stick with me until the end to understand every single detail.
That's what I'm here for.
What's up, everyone? I'm Diego, and welcome to Chimi Verso 7. To clarify a few things right from the start, like in all my videos, my analysis focuses on the manga, no anime or TV special. I also won't be considering information from outside the story. I know that Toriyama planned for androids 19 and 20 to be the real villains of the saga, and then he shifted to 17 and 18, and then even to Cell. And it's these changes that made things happen the way they did. But this video is an analysis of the manga, of the story's consistency itself, of what was presented within it. So information from outside the universe doesn't matter. So let's get started.
In Trunks' special chapter, Gohan confronts the androids, and 17 says that the last time they fought, he had only used half of his power. It's this statement from 17 that makes many people question if the future androids were holding back to the point of using half their power, then they never were actually weaker than the present ones, as Trunks said. It was Trunks who was unaware of this. It's a reasonable line of thought, and it makes sense. In fact, I myself believed this for a long time, and it was only recently by reading and rereading it more carefully that my view began to change. And in this video, I'm going to try to explain why. We'll discuss the androids themselves later, but I have to start with the most fundamental issue: the narrative progression. It's what ultimately defines which androids were the strongest, and it was extremely clear about this. Trunks tells Goku about Dr. Gero and the androids. Goku is surprised by how Trunks, a guy who killed Frieza like it was nothing, spoke of the androids, and concludes they must be pretty strong. Trunks confirms that yes, he confronted them, but there were two androids, and even in a one-on-one fight, it was still hard to escape with his life. Goku asks if he had any allies, and Trunks told him that everyone had been killed and he was the last of the Z fighters alive. And then Trunks reinforces that they were strong, very strong. After the 3-year time skip, as they were heading to Dr. Gero's lab, Trunks says that even though he was also a Super Saiyan, he was no match for the two androids. Notice the emphasis again on the fact that there were two of them. After everyone gets beaten down by 17 and 18, Trunks reveals that the androids he fought in his future didn't have such devastating strength. Against them, Trunks says he could at least put up a decent fight. Later, while flying with Krillin, Trunks wonders how the story could have changed so much, and again says that the future androids weren't that strong. On the plane, Krillin says the androids were much stronger than Trunks had said, and then once again, Trunks wonders how the story could have changed so much, and how the androids are so much stronger than the ones he fought. So up to this point, what was the idea the story wanted to convey? That the future androids were strong, stronger than Trunks, because Trunks emphasizes this. But also, if you paid attention, one of Trunks' main disadvantages was the fact that he fought alone. This was an important point. Trunks repeated this several times. Up to a certain point, this was more important than the concept of limitless energy, because Trunks only reveals that information much later, when he comes to the present for the second time, right when they were already heading to the lab. So we have 4 direct statements categorically affirming that the present-day androids were indeed stronger. So far, we have no reason to believe the characters are lying or mistaken about this. In fact, it's quite the opposite. This showed that Trunks was mistaken before for thinking that the androids in the present would have the same strength as those from the future, and that's because Trunks hadn't imagined that things would change so much thanks to his intervention in the timeline. Continuing with the narrative progression, let's now talk about what it presented regarding the changes in the timeline itself. Back in Trunks' conversation with Goku, Trunks says he ended up altering history unnecessarily and that he should have only met Goku, not the others. And this already raises a question. Trunks implies that things didn't happen this way in the future. Trunks knew the exact location and time Goku's ship would land on Earth, so much so that they had to wait for 3 hours for Goku to arrive. In other words, in the future, did Goku and Frieza's ships arrive on Earth hours later than they did in the present? Or did Goku not learn instant transmission on Yardrat in the future? Trunks, who knew these minute details, had no knowledge of Goku's instant transmission. Why? How? In the future, did Goku use instant transmission as he planned to do in the present, kill Frieza and King Cold, and then only hours later his ship empty?
I always just assumed that's what Goku did, because I know in Trunks' timeline, Goku is the one that kills Frieza, because Trunks is a baby in that timeline, so there's no Trunks to kill Frieza. So Goku's the one that does it, and he gets there in time for Frieza not to be the one that kills everyone, so they make it to the point where the androids kill everyone instead. And I never figured that maybe Goku's ship just got there fast enough, whereas in the present timeline that we're in, Goku's ship was never going to get there on time, but that he would have used instant transmission to get there instantly and then kill Frieza. And he didn't do that ultimately because he sensed that Frieza was destroyed by someone that was powerful enough to do it. And I think in the present timeline, at least in the anime, he assumes that it was Vegeta, or is that in the manga? I forgot.
Landed on Earth? If so, did he not tell the others? Did the others not see it? Did they not go to the Frieza landing site in the future? If they did, they would have known about the technique, and this information would have been passed on to Trunks by Gohan or by Bulma herself.
Absolutely.
Since she went to the site for curiosity. Did Bulma go to the site in the future? If not, did they tell her everything else but not about the instant transmission? Or did Goku and Frieza really arrive together 3 hours later?
That seems unlikely that they wouldn't talk about it at all, because when Goku demonstrates the instant transmission technique, especially in the manga, because I remember this was literally the first chapter of manga that I ever read for Dragon Ball Z. It was literally that chapter. And when he demonstrates the instant transmission, they are all mind blown by it, because he goes and gets Roche's glasses and then comes back and they're like, whoa, but he's like on the other side of the world. Like, how did you do that so quickly? And it's like, it's definitely something they would have talked about, especially if Goku ended up passing. It would have been one of his most incredible feats. They absolutely would have talked about it. So that's very interesting that Trunks doesn't know about it and that it's not mentioned to Trunks. I guess maybe the timeline is drastically more different than we assumed before. I never really considered that.
See, with just this one event, many questions can already be raised. I don't have these answers, but what is clear is that with just this, we can see that things happen differently in the present and the future, even before Trunks' direct intervention.
Right.
After all, Trunks intervened precisely because things were already different. When he returns to the present, Trunks is completely surprised to see androids 19 and 20, and even more surprised that 20 is Dr. Gero himself. Vegeta throws it in Trunks' face that everything he said was wrong, and Trunks' response is that he couldn't believe it either, and that his only explanation is that the story went off the rails, probably because of his trip to the past. Shortly after, upon learning that Goku's heart virus had manifested so late, Trunks wonders if the timing of events had changed that much. Later, Trunks questions all of this again, saying that he had gone to a past that was very different from the one he was familiar with. Then Krillin asks if the androids were really evil, and Trunks says yes, they were monsters, cold-blooded killers.
I always kind of considered whether or not Android 19 and Android 20 were even in Trunks' timeline, and maybe just no one told him about them, and that's why he wasn't familiar, because in his timeline he was a baby when, you know, Android 17 and 18 were awoken, and 16 if he was even in his timeline. And so he wouldn't have well, 16 couldn't have been in his timeline because 16 would still be there, and 16 wouldn't be shocking to him. He would know already, he would know that there were 3 androids, and in our timeline there are 3 androids and not just 2. So that's already a drastic change that Trunks did not experience. And so it makes me believe also that 19 and 20 probably weren't actually in this timeline. For one, there's already evidence of there being more androids in the present timeline, so that's evidence that there are changes as well, specifically related to how many androids there are. But also, that would have been another weird thing to not tell Trunks. It would be very odd to not tell Trunks, hey, there's actually like 4 androids in total, but there's only 2 that made it, because let's say Vegeta got there and he was a Super Saiyan and he took out the first 2, and then he blew up 16 before he could be activated or something like that. It's just like weird that Trunks wouldn't have that information. So it seems a lot more likely that they just weren't there. But then it like begs the question, why are they there in the present timeline?
and that at least that was true in his era. And after so many questions, we finally discover the real reason why things were so different from what Trunks knew: the other time machine and the presence of Cell in this timeline. That was the main reason why history had changed so much. Notice that the plot was never that Trunks didn't know what he was talking about. He did know, because he emphasizes that the story was different from what he knew. So it's implied that the information he had was correct for his timeline, passed down by Gohan and Bulma. Everything changed. The arrival times of Frieza and Goku changed, the androids who attacked the island changed, the moment Goku's illness manifested changed, the number of existing androids changed, the very personality of the androids changed. And so we must ask ourselves, since so many things changed, why would only the android's power not have changed? Does that make sense to you? It doesn't make sense for the whole narrative to try to deceive us like that when it was stated many times that the present ones were stronger, and this is emphasized even more than all the other changes.
Many might say that Trunks was always wrong because he didn't know the future androids were holding back. But is that really the case? We have to pay attention to the correct sequence of events in chronological order. 4 years before making the time trip, Gohan says that Trunks had developed well and would surpass him in the coming months. That same day, the androids attack a nearby city. Gohan stops Trunks from going to fight and goes to the battlefield alone. When he gets there, Gohan says he trained a lot to face them, but is surprised by 17's statement, who says that the last time they fought, he was only using about 50% of his power. And that information died with Gohan. Trunks never found out about it. 3 years pass. Trunks trains and gets stronger. Now he believes he can defeat the androids. So a logical and obvious deduction here is that Trunks considers himself above Gohan's level. Otherwise, he would be heading to certain death, since Gohan himself had died. At that moment, the time machine was ready and he was preparing to make the trip. But even so, Trunks gives up the time trip to go fight alone. Trunks is not a character who jokes around, takes risks, or makes these kinds of senseless decisions. He said many times that Vegeta was throwing his life away against the androids, and he got annoyed with his father's irrational decisions, putting everything at risk. Trunks says that this would be the day he would avenge everyone they killed. So it becomes very clear that Trunks had surpassed Gohan's level here. He surely thought he had a chance to win, and that's the point. Until that moment, Trunks didn't know the androids were holding back.
But he does learn that information, and he still ends up saying that the present androids are stronger than the ones from his timeline.
Because he wasn't present when 17 told that to Gohan.
Right.
And that's exactly why he loses and ends up in the hospital and says he was still no match, that he didn't know how he escaped with his life. It's precisely because he was unaware of the android's true strength before. It was in this last fight that he discovered the androids were stronger than he thought. However, it's about this fight that he talks to Goku. It's about this fight that he says he confronted them. It's about this fight that he says that in the end, it was 2 against 1. It's about this fight that he declared that even in a one-on-one, it was difficult. It's about this fight that he says the androids were very strong. But it's also about this fight that he declared that he could at least put up a decent fight against them. It's about this fight where the androids showed more strength that Trunks was referring to every time. Yet even so, he categorically states that the future androids were not as ridiculously strong as the present ones. Notice the function of that statement from 17. It's not there to show that the future androids had the same power as the present ones.
But it's there to say actually the exact opposite, that even when they're close to maxing their power, they're still not even remotely as strong as the present timeline androids. And then there's 16.
Rather, to explain why Trunks even considered abandoning the idea of time travel to face the androids himself, even after losing before, even knowing Gohan had died. He went to fight because he considered himself to have become stronger than all of them, and therefore he could win without knowing that previously they had been holding back. Do you see the difference?
Bro, this is peak writing from Akira. Mind you, this man is a comedy manga writer, bro. He made the ultimate shonen as a comedy manga writer, bro. The goats, my goats.
Furthermore, it was only 17 who said he used about 50% of his power, not 18. 17 wasn't marginally stronger than 18, like by 2 or 5%. No, they had a more considerable power difference, because Toriyama himself explained that the focus on power for 18 was reduced. In other words, if 18's power were so close to 17's, Dr. Gero would have made the same mistake again, and intentionally. And that makes no sense whatsoever, but we'll see why later on. We can also see that 18, although stronger, was close to Vegeta's level as a Super Saiyan, while 17 was at the level of Piccolo after he had already fused with Kami.
And Vegeta said that this fused Piccolo had already surpassed his power.
And Piccolo was already near the level of a Super Saiyan even before the fusion. So it could even be the case that the future 17 still had more power to spare, but the future 18 not so much. Against her, most likely, as Trunks himself said, he could put up a decent fight. It's no wonder he's impressed that her present version defended herself with such ease and broke his sword. It's also no wonder that on his first visit, upon seeing that Goku was stronger than himself and even stronger than he had been told, Trunks' hope is renewed.
That's crazy. For some reason, I always thought 18 was stronger. I guess because Cell had to absorb her to reach his perfect form, so I just kind of assumed, but that's valuable information.
There's one more scene I want to comment on, which is when Trunks returns to his future after Cell has been defeated. 17 is surprised that Trunks is still alive, and 18 asks if she can kill him this time, since he was getting annoying. 17 says they would lose their favorite punching bag, but tells her to go ahead. And as much as some might think this scene contradicts what was stated earlier, it doesn't. When 17 says Trunks was their punching bag, he's just repeating what he's always thought. When Trunks states that this time would be different, it's a sign that before he was indeed made into a punching bag. He got stronger and surpassed Gohan, but it's not because he showed a better level this time that it would have changed 17's perception, since the androids were still stronger. So no problem with 17's statement. 17 also says he didn't expect Trunks to be alive, and Trunks had said he couldn't believe how he escaped alive from that last confrontation. In other words, in that last confrontation, the androids went harder than in all the previous ones, so much that they thought he was dead. 17 told 18 to go ahead and eliminate Trunks by herself. But this isn't proof that Trunks was wrong when he talked about the android's powers. He said that even in a one-on-one fight it was difficult, but that he could at least fight. But that doesn't mean Trunks had power equal to the future 18. As an example, a Cyberman with a power level of 1200 couldn't have a decent fight with Tien, who surpassed 1800 because the power difference was 50%. But with Yamcha, who had 1480, the fight is more balanced. The difference was about 23%. So if the future 18 were 25 or 30% stronger, Trunks could still fight. 18 would apply pressure and have the advantage, but Trunks could at least put up some resistance. So I don't see how this scene and this dialogue contradict what was established before.
Now let's talk about the androids themselves. Although the story didn't explicitly explain the mechanisms that made the present androids stronger than the future ones, I think some reasons were implied, so I'll try to bring that explanation here. We saw that Dr. Gero definitely did not want to awaken the present androids, but was forced to because he was suffering a crushing defeat from the Z Fighters. When he goes to awaken them, he says he hoped the problems of the past had been resolved. What were these problems? This is answered when 17 and 18 are awakened and say good morning to him, apparently showing that they are now obedient. Gero then says this was a relief, because while trying to keep all functions running along with their great powers and infinite energy, he couldn't maintain control, which resulted in the two androids being disobedient. It became clear from this that one thing got in the way of the other. Too much power hindered obedience. This is reinforced when 18 asks why Dr. Gero built a 19 with the energy absorption model, if it was because he had realized that the infinite energy models were too strong for him to control. The very existence of 16 also reinforces this. Dr. Gero says he was a failure. But a failure why? He was extremely powerful, more so than 17 and 18. So it wasn't because of that. So when 17 and 18 continued to disobey his orders, wanting to awaken 16, Dr. Gero says they were failures just like 16. In other words, disobedient. That was 16's failure as well. The relationship between power and obedience became very clear here. The more power, the more disobedient. But besides making it clear here, Toriyama explicitly confirmed this in chapter 367. He draws an illustration to explain the androids and says that 17 had a lot of focus on power, and as a result, he was disobedient. And because he was disobedient, he was considered a failure. Then, with 18, he says the focus on power was reduced, but despite that, she was also disobedient, so she was also a failure. And then, when describing 19, it said that he was a success, the first of them to be classified that way. You can see that all the others were classified as failures. And why was he a success? Because he reduced the power even more and reached an optimal point where the android became obedient. Therefore, with an obedient android, Dr. Gero could now ask an android to also rebuild him. And since he only observed the Z fighters up to the Saiyan saga, he concluded that 19's level, which achieved a balance between power and obedience, was more than enough to defeat Goku, since by his calculations, he didn't expect him to get much stronger from that point on. In other words, Gero never based the creation of the androids on the Z fighters' powers. He could already create androids stronger than them even before 17 and 18. The problem was that he couldn't control these androids, which is why he never used them. In the present, Dr. Gero abandoned 17 and 18 to create 19. When they are awakened, neither of them knew there was
I never read any of that, even though I read that first chapter where Trunks comes to the present timeline and then he has that chat with Goku and then Goku does the instant transmission. I didn't really read it. I didn't read it in order, basically. And so like I missed a lot of that information from the manga due to me just jumping around and reading various chapters, because I watched all of the anime multiple times, but I've only read certain parts of the manga, and I definitely never dived that deeply into some of the like additional and supplementary information that Akira was providing. So this is all like fascinating to me, honestly, but it does explain a lot and it gives the story a lot more context, to the point where it's like a lot of the stuff that I used to consider plot holes, and that honestly a lot of like the DBZ community consider plot holes, aren't really plot holes. They're actually very thoroughly explained. Again, this is a comedy writer, bro. This is peak writing. My goat.
the number 19. This proves they hadn't been awakened for testing for a very long time. And all this explains why 17 and 18 are weaker in the future, because unlike in the present, where Dr. Gero abandons 17 and 18 to create 19, in the future, he would have continued trying to stabilize 17 and 18 by decreasing their power.
By making them weaker.
Since
okay.
that was the requirement.
Dang, no, that's actually peak writing. So it's very thoroughly explained, actually. Bro, I've literally never seen someone break it down like this. This is crazy.
Achieve the android's obedience. At some point, he would have thought the androids had reached a balance of power and obedience, but with a power still superior to 19's. But in reality, the androids were just pretending. We saw how cunning they were when they woke up, feigning friendliness and immediately eyeing the controller in his hand, just waiting for a good opportunity to steal it. You might say this isn't possible because when Dr. Gero thought about reducing power, he created 19, who was already a different model. In other words, it wouldn't be possible to adjust the power of the infinite energy androids downward, because all that power was a consequence of them being infinite energy models. But no, the very existence of 18 answers this, showing that it indeed was possible since she was also an infinite energy model, but was already weaker than 17. If I haven't been clear enough so far, let me try to clarify this once and for all. What I'm trying to say with all this is that Dr. Gero in the future intentionally made the androids weaker to maintain greater control over them, since as we saw, the more power, the less control. But even so, he failed, because although they were already weaker, they were still powerful enough to remain disobedient. In the present, however, he built 19 and converted himself into an android, so he didn't pay the same attention to implementing power suppression measures on 17 and 18. And that is precisely why the present-day androids would be stronger than the future ones. This explanation isn't explicitly stated in the story, but
Right, like, it's not even the information so much as like the way this guy is putting it together, because this information has been out there for a long time, and I've consumed a lot of content talking about this topic specifically, and the Cell arc and the Android arc is literally like my favorite saga of DBZ, but this has literally never been presented by anybody like this before. I've never seen it or heard it explained this way, and I've gone over this shit like hundreds of times. I've consumed a lot of content about this specific story, this specific part of the story, and I have never seen someone connect the dots like this. It's crazy. It's like all the pieces are there for you to put together the answer. It's really not a plot hole. It's actually very thoroughly explained, even though Akira has to like continue to change the story and change the main villain and change how we get to the climax of the story. Like he's still putting like the pieces and laying the foundation so that it all makes sense in the context of the overarching world. It's actually such peak writing, bro.
Based on the concept of power versus obedience, which is a very clear theme, it's the explanation I can offer.
And you might be wondering if 19 existed in the future. To me, based on the story's construction, it's very clear that he did not.
No, yeah, he absolutely did not.
The point of emphasizing many times through Trunks that 19 and 20 were not present in Trunks' future. And unlike what many people think, and what I'm arguing against in this video, Trunks was not an ignorant character who didn't know things. It was the reality of the present that was different from what was true in his timeline.
That's just absolutely foolish to think that it's something Trunks just wouldn't know. Like that flies in the face of like his character writing, which is done very well.
We can also deduce this from the androids' attack on the island. Trunks knew the day and time it would happen. It happened, but the androids were different. And this proves that attacking the island was never the androids' own idea, but Dr. Gero's, because in the present, it is Dr. Gero who attacks the island. So in the future, for 17 and 18 to have done this, it was most likely Dr. Gero, still human, who was giving them the order.
Thinking he had more control over them now? Or trying to dissuade them from doing what he wanted using the remote, exactly as he did in the present? I don't know, but if he had created 19, 19 would have rebuilt him, so they themselves, just as in the present, would have attacked the island.
And I know you might be divided between two perspectives right now, one that is leading you to agree with me and the other to disagree. The first would be that of the butterfly effect, where small changes in initial conditions can lead to drastically different and unpredictable long-term outcomes. The famous metaphor where the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil could theoretically trigger a tornado in Texas weeks
Sure, but I think that's actually a pretty lazy explanation considering everything that's been presented in this video.
later. And in this case, the mere presence of Cell in the main timeline, arriving a year before Trunks himself appeared, was already altering the course of events, which led to so many differences compared to Trunks' future. The second perspective doesn't believe in this, and argues that there must be a direct cause and effect explanation, and in that case, there should be a direct explanation for why Cell's presence altered, for example, the onset of Goku's disease, the number and personality of the androids, etc., and not just a passive effect, if we can put it that way, of Cell being present in that world. But we have to be honest and say that Dragon Ball, Akira Toriyama's story, didn't set out to explain this. It simply said that's how it was and that's it. Cell was in that world, his was the presence that bothered Kami so much, and for some reason things became different. The work was quite clear in showing that this was the case without further complex explanations of logical and direct interventions. In other words, the story's explanation was more like that of the butterfly effect, and to demand an explanation beyond that to deny that the androids had power differences makes no sense. The story simply said that things changed, and that's that. And if you disagree with me, but
oh, okay, like Cell is the butterfly effect that triggers like Gero's approach, or like the difference in Gero's approach to like his ultimate plan to kill Goku and the rest of the Z fighters and kind of take over the world. I get what he's saying. So he's kind of saying like it's a little bit of both, I guess, but that ultimately like it has to at least partly be a butterfly effect because of the presence of Cell. I guess that makes sense.
You still trust the official guides. The Daisenshu guidebooks agree with this interpretation and acknowledge that the present-day androids were stronger. I saved this little piece of information for the end because the focus is on the analysis and how we arrive at our conclusions. The conclusion that the present androids were stronger than the future ones is the conclusion that prioritizes the complete narrative and not just one single line from 17. Because 17's line doesn't change the constructed narrative at all. It's not there to throw the explanation of the previous 60 chapters in the trash and change your perception of the androids' powers. Both things are true. The present androids were stronger, and the future ones also held back against Gohan and Trunks for a good while, and it was only in his last fight before going to the past that Trunks felt more of their power. but I get the impression that this fact doesn't please many people because it implies that future Gohan, a character that many love, would be weaker than they imagine. That's why many prefer to continue considering that the future androids are just as strong, because it preserves future Gohan's power at a higher level. And I'm talking about his manga version here, but as for future Gohan, we'll break it all down in a future video.
Damn.
So what do you guys think about this? Do you agree with this line of reasoning, or do you completely disagree? Do you think there's another interpretation that is better, or maybe one that makes even more sense that I might have missed? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you found this video interesting, please leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Here are 2 more videos on the screen that I'm sure you'll like.
I'm Diego, and I'll see you in the next video here on Shimiverso 7.
Yeah, no, I like this channel. I'm definitely subbed up. And I mean, that is interesting to leave it off on the note of future Gohan, because that does mean necessarily that he's a lot more weaker than what we thought. I mean, a lot of people love future Gohan, and a lot of people power scale future Gohan a little bit too high, in my opinion. So it makes sense as to why like people don't like that theory. It's almost like a subconscious reason that people will fight against it. Even me personally, I probably would have used that as a reason coming into this. But based on all the evidence that he presented, I'm inclined to believe like pretty much all the points that he presented, especially that the androids from the present timeline just are fundamentally stronger, and that Trunks wasn't necessarily wrong about assessing their power or presenting the circumstance. It's just something that happened due to like the massive butterfly effect, or cicada effect, if you will, of Cell appearing in their timeline before Trunks even got there. But hey, let me know what you think down below. Like and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.